Everybody's in this class has had me before, so this is easy introduction. There was something I sent out for everybody to fill out. I will send it out again as a reminder. If you have it, I will take it. It's more for, there are no right or wrong answers in this. It's more or less getting an idea of what you're thinking. Again, remember, I don't care how you feel. I care about what you think. Hurry up. You got 5-second rule. Any other government word?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I need to do that.
Let's see. So, government orientation. Most of you already know this. My contact information. We do have a schedule. I call it ongoing because it does, for government, it may change depending on if I come across anything. So grades. I don't know if we're going to be using InGrade. Anybody? Because it's kind of,
we used up the free trial or whatever.
yeah, well, the thing that's a killer is they used to make it free, but now it's not free because they want you to use their full-blown education or let's say, indoctrination stuff from McGraw-Hill, which is one of the bad things that sometimes about some of these that start out as free, they get bought up by a company like McGraw-Hill, which tends to do textbooks and then go, hey, we're going to use this and charge people for it. Isn't that cool? We can make lots of money off of people's education, which I don't have a problem making money off of education. It's just a pain. So here's what the grading looks like is 25% of your work will be on assignments, 25% will be based on the test, 15% will be based on class participation, another 15% on current event article, and then 20% of your grade is on project. So of course, class time, current events article. So what everybody's going to need to do is you're going to need to find an article. For those of you who are taking my history class, this is kind of fills two events here because you'll have a current event article for my history class and you'll have a current event article for this class. So what you want to do, and there should be plenty, at least between now and November, plenty of information on current event articles that are specifically political, because you got Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton running for office. So there should be a lot of stuff for you guys to find something to write about. But I will send you more information on that. So tests. I have 2 tests per quarter. Pretty simple. I'm trying to remember if I think there might be a little bit of, there might be an essay question, but mostly multiple choice. Projects. So the first one is your first project will be to investigate a congressional race for your district. So you'll have to find who's running for Congress in your district. You can also do the Senate race here, but we're going to leave the presidential race alone because I think it's actually more important who you vote for in your congressional race than who you vote for in the president. And actually, if we wanted to get down to it, it really should be more important who you elect as your mayor and your city council representatives than who you vote for as president and so forth. Yes?
So can I do my project about my dad? He's
Why?
running for, he's on council.
No, because I went for Congress. Sorry. If he was running for Congress, I'd say okay. But no, what I want to do is look at more of the national stuff because unfortunately, we have shifted from this idea of America being a republic and being more governed at the local level to being governed at the federal level, which is not how our founding fathers designed things. But we will cover that as we go through the class. So we'll write a 2-page paper as to why you would vote for either candidates. And I have this nice little cheat sheet to help you go through questions that you ask, talk to your mom and dad, what their thoughts are, get their opinions. So the object is just to get you some ideas. One of the things too is, hey, you can call up the candidate. You can see if you can talk to him. That'd be interesting. Especially if you call up the Republican one and ask him a question on how should we handle the poor? What his thoughts are on that, because Republicans usually get in trouble for what their view on the poor is. You might get an interesting answer. The other one is you could call up a Democrat and ask them what their view of abortion is. Of course, you're probably more than likely going to get what their answer is. But the thing is what you're trying to do is really the best question is asked, why should I vote for you as a candidate? And then the next question is, how does the Constitution fit? And how do you follow the Constitution as a representative? Yes?
So do we have to write one paper for the Democrat and one for the Republican, or just?
No, you're going to write one paper. You're going to talk about the different viewpoints of each. Like I said, I got a handout to send you guys to let you know what you're going to need. I'm going to get that to you soon because unlike in history where we've got some time for this project, with the election coming up in November, we're right in the middle of it. Now's a great time to start doing research and getting information on these candidates while they're campaigning. The other project that we're going to do for the second quarter is you're going to write a bill. And this isn't bill the person, this is a bill as in an actual kind of try to make a law. Yes?
Can I use that as a rough draft for my bill we can pass?
Correct. Yes. So so if you want to investigate, in fact, I've got the format I have for my bill might not be the same one for TeamPact, but if you want to give me that information on how they're wanting their bills formatted, that would be great. I can incorporate that into the class. Here's something that used to be the case back a long time ago. When the country was founded, we followed a gentleman by the name of Blackwell and his idea of government and law. And that all law had the foundation of the Bible. And that we had to have a basis in Scripture for the enacting of a law. And if we didn't have a foundation for Scripture, then there was no reason to have the law. And that was Blackwell. Well, in the 1850s, there is a change at the Harvard Law School as to who becomes the president of Harvard. And he brings in a gentleman, I think his last name is Elliott. I have to double check that. But he brings in a gentleman who believes that the law should evolve, just like evolution and man and species, and we came from bugs and little mites and whatever, single-celled organisms. So just like us, the law should be allowed to evolve, and so he changes the law school to stop teaching Blackwell and start teaching based on what's called, what we use today, which is precedent law, which means that a law, a judge's ruling should be based on precedent set by previous rulings. Well, the problem that you have is a previous ruling by a judge may be wrong. So that doesn't mean, prime example, the Dred Scott decision basically said, made blacks second-class citizens and said that they had no rights. That was the Dred Scott decision by the Supreme Court. Based on that principle, then, therefore, we should have the precedent today to make that same declaration. That's totally wrong. So that's what happens in this. So that's why as part of this, that you will need to justify your bill based on biblical terms. Why is it that we should pass this law one way or another? and you'll have to justify it from Scripture. You can earn some extra credit, so you can like volunteer for a candidate. You already have an opportunity to volunteer for your candidate. And what you want to do is write a paragraph about your experience and then just have it signed that you actually volunteered for that candidate. So, you don't have, I don't know, I've never had anybody do it. So, we'll figure that out as it goes. But, you know, that's something, you know, sometimes candidates need people to go and answer phones, stuff envelopes, pass out stuff at the campaign. Another thing that, you know, I had done before is go work at the polls on, you know, I think the, you know, on the voting booth on Tuesday. I actually, for President Bush, was at the polls handing out Republican literature for the first Bush election back in 2000. So, you know, you can do something like that, and that was fun. It was interesting, all the looks that I got from people and comments, and watched a bunch of high school or college students run up and pull up in their car and steal the Bush Cheney signs out from around there. I got their license plate number and turned them in. So I don't ever know what happened, but yeah, stuff like that happens. So that's kind of what we're doing with government. So let's see, I want to start. Where did I say that? What I want to do is cover a few things here from my world history. So to give you an idea of where we're coming from today, and then we're going to build on this as we go through the government class. What I do in my class, if you looked at the schedule that I sent you, is I spend a lot of time on laying the foundations for some things and giving you guys some information on the foundations. And then what we will do is then we will then spend some time in the book in the second quarter going through the book. So laying those foundations for you and some of those principles will help guide where we're going in the book. So you can kind of put the book away for the first 8 weeks because we aren't going to touch it for the first 8 weeks. So it really only takes about 2 weeks to go through the book if we really wanted to do it. So just so you know. But then we will hit the book that last quarter. What I want to do is I want to go through some things to lay down those foundations. And this comes a little bit out of my worldview class. So this week and then next week we're going to have a video. We may do a video or I may teach it myself. I haven't decided yet. It depends on what kind of time I have and putting the class together for next week. So what we have is this idea of we live in what we call postmodern society. And what postmodernism is, this idea of, really can be summed up as truth doesn't matter because truth is variable. What's true for you may not be true for me, may not be true for you, may not, you know, truth is all relative. And so when you have truth being relative and there's no foundation, we end up with, well, we can have a debate as to whether abortion's right or wrong. And to some person, abortion is, well, abortion's right. To another person, abortion is totally wrong. You know, then it's really, with modernism, it comes down to this idea of, well, see, I'm more tolerant than you are. Therefore, I'm more enlightened and I'm a better person. And you Christians are so intolerant to think that there's only one way to heaven that we need to do something with you, like maybe someday put you in concentration camps. But that's way down. I'll be dead by then. You guys will still be alive. Just kidding. But it's those kind of ideas, though, that led us to Germany. It's those kind of ideas that lead us to a Hitler. It's this idea of where where we get our truth and where we don't. So this comes from a gentleman by the name of Francis Schaeffer, Dr. Francis Schaeffer, who is dead, but he wrote a number of books, very influential in Christian thinking back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and actually had, surprisingly, I came across Francis Schaeffer's name reading a biography on Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan's philosophy on government and so forth actually comes out of a lot of his beliefs following Francis Schaeffer, which I was like, wow, if Ronald Reagan thought this guy was good, maybe I should read him. So I started reading him, and it's like, wow, this guy is really good. So Francis Schaeffer put together this idea of how we've gotten to where we were in the past and where we are in our mindsets today in postmodernism. And what he looks at it is we have created what he calls this gulf between man and the supernatural, or what we would call, in our case, God. And we created this gulf between them. And this started back in the 1600s, which for those of us who are covering U.S. history, it's about right in the time frame we are at right now. And what it starts with is philosophy. You have, going on in the 1600s, you have two competing philosophies. You have the Enlightenment, which comes about, and you have what also happens during the 1600s. Starts by the guy by the name of Martin Luther. The Reformation. So you really have two competing thoughts going on at this time in philosophy. One is the Reformation and the other is the Enlightenment. And so out of the Enlightenment, we have philosophy. And this is where we start changing in philosophies. We start looking, the Reformation is about looking at God and seeing how we fit in. The Enlightenment is about looking at man and figuring out where God is. And when you look at man and when you look at the universe, and that's your starting place, you can never reach this idea of what is the overlying principles of life. And that's the problem. The Reformation starts with those overarching principles of life and bring them down in how they impact man. So a great illustration of that is Plato. In one of the famous paintings, Plato is pointing down at the ground, or no, Aristotle is pointing down at the ground. Plato is pointing up, and meaning that Plato had this belief that if you look at the overarching principles of life, then you could figure out how man fits in there and how the world works. Aristotle believed that if you looked at the underlying principles, which is where the Enlightenment philosophy comes out of, you could figure out what the important things, what those universal truths are. So that's where we get this start in philosophy. So what happens is man starts looking only at science, what he can see, what he can prove. And that's where the philosophy starts. So then what happens is philosophy, what's being thought, starts impacting art. So then art, you start seeing a change in art. And if you look at art back at that time, man was drawn, in earlier art, man was drawn bigger than life. Nature was secondary. Well, during this time frame, when the Enlightenment philosophy starts taking hold, we start seeing a swing in the pendulum back to man is being drawn as he is, and nature now being brought to where it's supposed to be. But what happens is, with this philosophy, is it goes to the other extreme, that man becomes part of nature and no longer in the image of God, but just another part of nature. And that's why you end up with painters who, when they painted them, I can't remember the name of the guy. He painted the Madonna holding the baby. And it turns out who he used as his model was his mistress and his illegitimate child to paint a picture of Mary and Christ. So think about this. He's painting Mary and Christ, and everybody that knew the guy knew who the woman was. So, I mean, in today, as a Christian, that's kind of, to me, that's kind of a slap in the face to God, what they did there. But this is kind of where art starts leaning towards. Well, art starts having an impact now on music. Again, this is step by step. It goes through this. And then music at that time starts to change. And then that then trickles down to the general culture, which now starts changing the regular people in our mindsets. And then what happens is that then starts having an impact in theology. And we can see that today. Look at Christianity today. There are Christians out there that will justify, well, it's okay. You know, Muslims can believe what they want to believe. It's okay. We don't want to judge. We don't want to say anything. You know, Mormons, you know, we don't want to judge. We don't want to say they're wrong. We don't want to say where anybody's wrong. That's how our theology is changing, being impacted on by our culture. When we look at the pre-modernism, people began with this idea of a Christian God who knows everything. And we know this little tiny speck. You have this board, you put this little tiny speck. God knows the board. We know this much. And we're still that way today, even though we think we are. But what we do know is that all human knowing is a part of God's perfect and exhaustive knowing. So we're finite, but He's infinite. And God revealed Himself to us in what we call special and general revelation. So special revelation would be Scripture. God revealed to us who He is through Scripture. But He also reveals to us who He is through creation. And that's where, as Christians, we should be the most scientific of anybody. Why? Because we know God who created the universe and is therefore understand that He set up laws and requirements for this, for that creation. And so we need to understand that. Also, they had what's called the open universe model. So what we did is they believed in a spirit world. They also characterized this by spirituality, magic in some cases. We even see that still today if we go over to Africa or some of these other countries where they have more of, you know, the shamans and the witch doctor and so forth and so on. You see that a little bit more often. But there was also more fear, superstition, and they had very little room for science. And this is where great men like Sir Isaac Newton come along, though, from a Christian perspective, and say, wait a minute, God created the universe, so therefore I can know the universe. I can know it was created. I know it was designed. I know there's principles, and then there's laws that this universe is governed by, and I can find out what they are, and I can investigate them. So also we have another model, which is tended to be what we use today, which is the closed model and the closed universe. So that think about when we do a scientific experiment, and many experiments today. We say that experiment is taking place here at this point. It's a closed model, energy going in, energy coming out. There's nothing added to that. So we tend to look at these things in closing off and only using certain, what I love in the Truth Project, the guy says we only look at what's in the box. If it's not in the box of the universe, we don't look at it. So we don't believe in miracles. We can't accept outside influence. We can't accept all these other things, which is kind of funny because in recent history, and probably the last 25, 30 years, they've come up with the idea of the string theory, that there are many more dimensions than the 4 that we know of, length, width, height, and time. That there could be up to 20 different dimensions out there. Gee, sounds like maybe there might be a spirit world part to this or something, who knows? So, when we want to look at science, we want to look at the whole thing. We want to look at it from God's eyes, from God's perspective, even though we only see the little dot, and God sees the whole big picture. Matter, energy, space, time, that's all there is. Again, no spiritual. Carl Sagan made the comment in his movie, the cosmos is all there is or ever was or ever will be. Does that sound familiar? How does that sound familiar? Basically, what's that? How would we say that in Christianity? God is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and last. So really what Carl Sagan is saying in this is the cosmos, the universe, is God. It's all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. The cosmos. So really when these scientists say that well, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, they believe in a God. They just make the universe their God. They make what's created. The controlled universe model. This is very similar to the closed. God created the universe with laws and structures. We can pursue science because of this structure. The creation reveals God's glory, balance between science and spirituality. So this is really what Newton believed, is this controlled universe model. That God's in control. We can have miracles because God's outside of the universe looking down on our box and able to go, oh, let's change this, let's change that. And he's still interacting in it. If you look at other religions, say Islam does not, Muslim does not believe God interacts in the universe. They believe God created the universe and then he stands back and he watches. And he doesn't interact. We as Christians believe that God is definitely interacting in the universe. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to believe in Jesus Christ. So early on, we go to this idea of, I talked about postmodernism. Well, before postmodernism, you have modernism. So, but the thing with modernism that was the problem is it stopped looking at God and started looking at just us. It was this shift into that Aristotle viewpoint. Looking at man and looking at the observable universe only and coming up with our ideas. One of the famous ones is Rene Descartes. He comes up with the Cartesian thinking, that I think, therefore I am. That whole idea. And he starts leading men really away from God. But the sad thing was, he actually thought he was doing the right thing. This guy was a devout Roman Catholic. And he was trying to find out more about God. But in reality, what he really did is he opened up the door for atheism and modernism and this idea of getting away from focusing in on God. I think, therefore I am. No, I am because God created me, not because I can think. Thinking is that divine part of God that no other creature really has. Some people go, well, gee, my dog thinks. Yes, has your dog ever come up with a philosophy? Has your dog ever come up with a worldview other than pet my head and I want food and I need to go outside because I got to go to the bathroom? Dogs don't have a philosophy. And everybody says, oh, dolphins, they're the smartest creatures in the world. Has a dolphin ever created a hospital No, they don't. Do they think? Yes, but when I talk about thinking, what I mean here is reason. They cannot come up with a philosophy. They just base on, their whole thing is based on how our brain works. Well, there's probably some people who their brain doesn't work either, and they don't think of much philosophy, and they don't think. They just assume. Modernism begins with I think and reason, and then form a judgment on whether God exists or what he is like. This puts I at the center of the universe, and God becomes an inference. Basically what that means is my viewpoint of the universe is more important, and therefore what I decide is the most important thing, and how I view God is the most important thing. It's not how God truly is, it's how I see him. That's more important than who God truly is. And I always ask, so where did the 10 Commandments come from? There's just a list of 10 rules. God said, hey, Moses, you know what? I don't like the way you guys are behaving, so I'm giving you 10 laws that you're going to follow. And if you don't follow, I'm going to strike you down. I'm going to send you to hell. Because I just don't like it. You don't follow these rules. So, hold on. Let's decide. Okay. Moses, let me look at the holy coin. Is that what God did? Did God say, what is sin? No. I'm going to tell you, Moses, who I am. And let me tell you, if you want to be like me, here's what you got to do. Write it down. Write it down. 1, don't have any other God but me. There's only me. I created the universe. Don't use my name in vain. 2, don't lie. Honor your father and mother. Why? Because Jesus here, my son, he honors me, the Father, and we honor the Spirit. We're all three the same. Complete unity. And don't commit adultery. Why not? Well, because you ever see Jesus run off with Satan and go, hey, Dad, I'm not real happy with you today. I'm going to go run off with the devil, and because he's a lot more fun. So these things that God put down in his commandments were not just rules. They are who he is. Always liked, growing up, Michael Jordan. And they always had this commercial, be like Mike. Well, it's the same principle. God had it before Michael Jordan did. Be like me, be like God. Follow these rules. This is what you need to do. Unfortunately, sometimes we think they're checklists of what we should do, or what, to check off. Oh, did that today. Oh, did that today. Oh, did that today. And we don't look at it as the commandments. And also as Christians, when we're looking at the 10 Commandments, they're not something that we have to follow. It's something we want to follow. There's a difference. There's a huge difference between wanting to follow something and having to follow something. Right? Parents set down an arbitrary rule. I don't want to follow that. I don't want to do that. Homework? I don't want to do homework. No. But when you get to the point where it's like, hey, I want to do this because I want to learn. I want to do this because of that. It changes the perspective on things. So in modernism, what happens though, is because we start with the I, there is no need for God. So therefore, what we destroy is this idea of, we start destroying the idea of an antithesis and, or antithesis, some people call it antithesis, the antithesis and absolutes. An antithesis means that it's kind of one of the top rules in philosophy. A and B cannot both be true. If A says this table is brown, this table cannot be green. That's what antithesis means. It is what it is. There's a yes and a no. What happens, though, in postmodernism and modernism is we start to move away from this idea of right and wrong, yes and no, God, no God. We start going, well, that religion over there, that's okay. They can believe in no God, and that's fine. Or as my favorite person in the Truth Project, she goes, oh, we all have this like this big crystal. We all see our only little parts of truth. No, that's not how it works. Truth comes from God, and we have to have that. We have to have that foundation, and there has to be an absolute. My favorite line is, somebody comes up to you and goes, well, I don't believe in absolutes. Is that an absolute? Are you absolutely sure you don't believe in absolutes? Wait, I got to think about that one again, right? Then they'll be like, talk to the hand, go away. I don't want to think about this.
You're intolerant.
Yeah, you're intolerant. You stupid Christians. Yeah, well, we're stupid. Oh my goodness. Just, but that, I mean, that's some of the things, and as Christians, one of the things even here with government and U.S. history and all this, when we're talking to somebody, and I'm going to harp on this all year long, don't argue. Ask questions. You never win an argument. But when you ask the right questions, you can get people to start to think. Because when you get people to argue, they don't think. They're not well, they do think. But they're not thinking about what you're talking about. They're thinking about how they can counter your argument. But when you ask them questions, they then have to examine their own philosophies. And that's the key. They have to examine their own philosophies. What this ends up with, when we start having no antithesis, no absolutes, we start leading to what Francis Schaeffer calls the line of despair. This line doesn't mean we're all sitting around going, oh, I'm soldiers. But what this means is, ultimately, without God, without a foundation, without truth, there's no real purpose in life. And people like Da Vinci started out probably one of the greatest scientists in the history of the world, starts trying to answer the questions through mathematics, tries to answer the question through art, tries to answer the question through all these different ways, and ends up in the end of his life depressed and near suicide. Why? Because he was starting without a God, without a foundation of truth. And without that, it only leads to what Francis Schaeffer calls despair. So the line of despair, so here's what the line of despair is. It's a point where our views and ideas no longer conform to reality or truth. It ultimately leads man to no purpose. Basically what that means is we don't any longer have anything that we can base our lives on, because there is no real truth. And Europe crossed the line back in 1890, and we crossed the line back in 1935. Basically, it took 45 years to get here because of the fact that in the United States, we had the ocean to cross, and back then it took a long time for philosophies to come over. But all of this stems out of the Enlightenment. And this kind of gives us an idea of where we are, our philosophy here in the United States. And it brings us to some of the things that we're dealing with today that we're going to get into, well, healthcare is a right. Is healthcare a right? What does that mean? If healthcare is a right, that means I go to the doctor's office and I tell the doctor he has to treat me. Well, what happens if the doctor says no? Well, you have to treat me. Healthcare is a right. Well, if I force the doctor to treat me, what is that? Constitution says it's unconstitutional for involuntary servanthood. Sounds to me if I'm forcing somebody to do my bidding and not rewarding them or paying them for something, that sounds to me a little bit like slavery. And when we start examining some of this stuff and knowing the underlying philosophies and where we've come from, we can better understand where these things ultimately end up. If you want to talk about, well, healthcare is a right. Well, gee, can't have good healthcare if you don't have food. So food must be a right. Okay, well, if you don't have food, well, if you need food too, well, maybe you need a house. So a house should be a right. Well, I need to go be able to work. So you have a right to a job. You have a right to a way to get there. Well, I got to have a car. So I should have a right to a car. So when you start adding on these rights in there, what does that lead to?
Communism.
Yeah, it does. It leads to almost a communism. And we're going to, these next couple of weeks, we're going to look at a lot of this. First off, we're going to start with, we're going to look at the principles. There's a great book, which I don't know if I made it a requirement for this class or not, but the 5,000 years, a number of principles that govern that. For the best government, we follow these principles. And there's 3 key ones in there, and we'll get to those. We look at things differently. So what we can say is what's true for you is true for that, not true for this, and over here. And we got to be accepting of all these different groups. And that's where it leads us to some of the problems that we run into. Is if everything is truthful, so that witch doctor in Africa, because he grew up in Africa, well, that's true for him. And so why should we keep him from going to heaven because he was born in Africa and is a witch doctor? No, we don't keep anybody from going to heaven. Everyone has a different perspective based on our culture, our religion, and our life experiences. A great example of this would be you're walking down the street. And as you're walking down the street, you see this car drive by you going really fast, and it goes behind the building so you no longer hear it. You hear the screeching of tires, and you hear, wham, this accident happened. So you go around the corner, and you see this car. It's wrecked. It's mangled. It ended up hitting another car, and people are hurt, and the police come to you, and you say, clearly this guy here was speeding, and that's what caused the accident. Okay, so the police officer takes your notes. Now, the police officer goes over here to somebody else, and he goes, well, clearly it was this car trying to turn left in front of the one car that you saw. It caused the accident because it turned in front of that guy. And it caused the accident. Which one of you is right? You all have your own perspective. But if we look at it as God saw it and how it really happened, you would see that the car, maybe the car that ran into the other car, swerved to miss a dog. Or swerved to miss some stupid college student stepping out in the roadway to get across the street because they're late for class. That never happens around here. So what truth is we don't always have a clear vision of the truth. And that's where modernism and postmodernism gets mixed up, is it takes our perspectives as truth, when in reality, they're just perspectives. It's not truth. Truth, ultimately, is how God sees it. And that's what we as Christians always want to strive to, is how does God see it? So we end up then into postmodernism. How then can you speak of the truth? Because we don't know the truth. Because we're so focused on perspectives that we don't know the ultimate truth. And as Nietzsche said, God is dead. And so therefore, with God's dead, then we don't have any foundation. What was always neat is Nietzsche did, God is dead. But then after Nietzsche died, somebody went on Nietzsche's tombstone and said, Nietzsche's dead. So, and signed it God. I think it might have been Nietzsche's desk where Nietzsche penned his stuff was actually purchased by a pastor who wrote sermons on it later. I think it was Nietzsche's. There's two famous relics that were anti-God people that turned out to be used later by Christians in some pretty interesting pursuits that I was like, yeah, God doesn't have a sense of humor. He's got a big sense of humor. Then also you begin with human finiteness, and there is humility in not knowing the truth. If you ever talk to somebody who is very, very liberal in their thinking, then they will be that whole analogy I gave earlier about, well, I'm more tolerant than you are because, you see, I'm so much more enlightened. I don't know the truth, and I can't know the truth. So therefore, I'm so much better than you. So what may be true for this person is not true for them, and oh, see how great I am. It's like my mind is mush and it's falling out my ears and everywhere else. So with postmodernism, good and evil become based on your own point of view. So in the sense of, how can I be mean? It's just not nice for us. That poor boy, he had to kill his parents. They were, this is based on a true story too. He had to kill his parents. They were oppressing him. And so, I felt so bad we had to make him innocent because his parents are dead. Yes, his parents are dead because he killed them. The Mendez trial, that's where that comes from. They found him not guilty. The jury's so sad because these boys, they lost their parents. Yes, the son went outside, reloaded the shotgun, and came in and finished his mother off. But they forgot all about that because, it just sounds bad.
That's creepy.
Yes, it is. Also with postmodernism, you got good and evil become on your point of view. I always like to say somebody who goes, well, I don't believe in absolutes. Oh, so if I slap you, then it'll be okay. Because I believe in slapping you. So, hey, that's fine. And, or you got somebody who doesn't believe in absolutes, you go, I'm going to steal some money from you. How about that? I'll break. As soon as you start violating those principles, those rules that are written on everybody's heart, lying is wrong, stealing is wrong. We all intuitively know that is wrong. There has never in our history been a society that said inside the community it is okay to steal. Never, never. It's never been in a community okay to be a coward. Well, people would say, well, what about the Quakers? No, they never believed in being cowards. They believed they didn't believe in war. They didn't believe in killing somebody. In fact, in some instances, their stance took more courage than other people's stances. There are always these intricate things that we all believe are true. But it leads to this idea of truth is relative, ultimate cultures. As soon as we say truth is relative, we justify You ask somebody, so do you think Hitler was an evil person? Want to throw a relativist into confusion? Ask them if Hitler was a bad guy or not. And they'll go, well. See, you're not a relativist. You believe in truth. Modern Christianity. One of the things about modern Christianity is today modern Christianity is probably what I would say the it's the least intellectual time since the death of Jesus Christ. What many Christians believe to be an intellectual, you have to give up your faith. Faith is more important. The problem with faith is, what is your faith in? I ask the question, people always go, my faith is in Jesus Christ. What's that mean? Explain it to me. What's faith in Jesus Christ? Well, my faith is in God. What about God is your faith in? Is your faith in the faith of God? Is your faith in the faith of Jesus Christ? Your faith is in what the Bible claims to be truth. It's all about truth. It's nothing. If you look at when Jesus is talking to Pilate, he tells you exactly why he came to the planet. He says, for this reason I was born, to testify to the truth. Tell me that truth doesn't matter. It is the only thing that matters. Because when we look at truth, is really what we're doing is we're looking at God. Because truth is who he is. And he came to testify about it. So we can't say we're a people of faith. Unless you add in, we're a people of faith in the truth claims of God. What God has said in the Bible. What God has shown us in the universe. What God has unveiled in his creation. That's where it all comes from. And that's going to be the basis of this government class too. Is what are those claims that we can look at biblically that help us see what a good government is? How does this say? Why is it that our government set up checks and balances? Because it knew the nature of man. What is the nature of man? Anybody?
Sin.
Sin. That's right. What does man want? Power, wealth, notoriety, all of that. We want our own view, our own way, everywhere. We do not really want to be with God. So as a Christian intellectual, you have to know what is real. It can't be just faith. And it's not just experience. And it's not just personal. You have to have, you just can't have faith. It has to be based in reality. And that's where we as Christians have failed. We have failed in the world. We have failed to be salt and light because we don't engage in the intellectual debates of today. We do not engage in the intellectual debate of creation. Why should they not believe in evolution? Well, because the Bible says it was created, that God created it. But I don't believe in the Bible. Well, if I don't believe in the Bible, then how can I believe? I believe in science. Well, science, that's where we have to go as Christians and go, well, gee, as a scientist, here's why I don't believe in evolution. How was the eye formed? It's one of those things I can't explain as a scientist. Where'd the eye come from? How did that organism know there was light? And so then, therefore, the organism formed an eye? Really? What came first? Was it the optical nerve? The lens? The iris? The rods and cones in the back of the eye? What was it? How was the eye formed? Those scientists, those people who believe in evolution can't answer those questions. Then I go, well, welcome to my boat, because I have no faith in your beliefs. Because when in evolution, somebody who believes in evolution, what they're really saying is, I have faith in evolution. So, Christianity has lost its influence in the culture and the world. When we talked about those steps, philosophy, art, music, general culture, theology, it used to be that theology drove philosophy. Now, in Christian society today, even amongst us today, it is all of these things down to the general culture, which then defines our Christianity, not the other way around. And that's where we, as Christians, need to change. We need to take our Christian viewpoints, form them in a way that makes sense to an outside world. Now, granted, that's going to be hard, because the Bible is clear that unless you have the Spirit, a lot of things that God says are not going to make sense. So we got to start with the basics. As Paul called it, the mother's milk. Got to start with the easy stuff. And we got to engage the culture. We got to engage in the philosophy. And we can't just say that's wrong because the Bible says it's wrong. We have to understand, why do we as Christians say that homosexuality is wrong? Is it because the Bible says it's wrong? Okay. But to somebody who doesn't believe in the Bible, how does that change their mindset? And is that really the argument we should be making? I would say no. You cannot, the argument we should be making is, you know what? The Bible is clear that homosexuality is a sin. And you know what? I'll tell you this. Homosexuality, in 10 years, if you're a homosexual, you're not going to be satisfied. Because you can't satisfy that need in you. That need you're feeling with homosexuality is a need for Jesus Christ. That's what you need, not homosexuality. And as Christians, we're no different. I mean, look at the church. Divorce in the church, promiscuity in the church. So I think we have to start living our life as a Christian. And that doesn't mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you guys have to be perfect. We're going to sin. We're going to make mistakes. This is an old slide, so that's why it says don't forget to do your homework next week. Get out of here. Sorry, that went a little longer than I had anticipated, but again, we're trying to lay that foundation for where we're going to go the rest of the year. Yes?
2 questions. One, is that being videotaped?
Yes.
So
I videotaped the class.
You're gonna be on YouTube.
No, it only pictures right here.
Your voice will be on
From
YouTube.
here,
I will be on YouTube.
from here, right about here, to over about here. Which a couple times I walked off the camera and I didn't realize it.
I like the end.
Yeah, get out of here. Go home. Go away. Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
So what is
Your homework in here, I will send you the handout.
Okay.
Pretty simple. Yes, I will send you. I will make sure that I send everybody. I'll resend the schedule, and I will resend the stuff. So next week we will get started at looking at a biblical view of the state and what that means, and what God has to say. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks on that, and then we will jump into the 5,000-year leap and the founding principles of our government. Yeah.